What's up, folks? I thought I would make a video on a 2-week old movie that no one is talking about anymore, because why not? I don't care about this YouTube channel. Maybe I will one day. But I just wanted to talk about Barbarian. It's a horror movie. It deals with sensitive subject matter, so be warned. I would say it's about Me Too and SA. You could just Google the abbreviation of SA and you'll understand. Even though I do have some problems with this movie, I do think it is a pretty decent movie. I think there's some interesting social commentaries. I don't think it completely nails the ending, and it is very all over the place. It is thriller, and then it's a kind of a campy horror movie, and then it's also a comedy. It's very weird, and I think that's kind of my issue with it, where the beginning is so well done, in parts obviously, and then it turns into kind of a farce at the ending, which you're like, is this a joke? I don't know if it's a joke. Were you being kind of self-aware? I don't know. But it's still, I would say, if you have seen just the name or the poster and you're like, I want to check this out, then I would say just check it out. I mean, you might be upset. You might be like, fuck, what did I just watch? Which is what I said when I walked out of this movie theater. What the fuck did I just watch? Yeah, so let's get into the plot details. So I just don't want to go too in-depth, because then I would go on a total tangent and I would just be summarizing the entire movie. Basically, this movie is split into 3 parts. One where it's sort of the main character and Bill Skarsgård. Both of these characters are on edge because they booked the same Airbnb, and that sort of throws them off because they're like, why would the person do this, right? It's very strange. And I think each act, they're clearly defined. It just goes right to black, and it's sort of, each act I feel like has its own theme that it's building toward, right? Like the first act is clearly about the gender dynamics, right? Like how a woman would see a strange guy, and how a guy would see a strange woman, right? And how these roles are kind of playing out, right? Where a woman is more cautious around people that she doesn't know, especially men, right? Because guys are a little bit more intimidating, or physically intimidating, so it kind of makes sense. While a guy is not really sort of scared of a woman, right? Like I don't think most guys are scared physically, unless it's like Ronda Rousey or some shit. I don't know. The point being is that those gender dynamics exist, and this movie does play around with that, especially with the main character, where it's like she's always on edge, she's always locking doors, and the moment when the guy sort of charms her up and is a little bit more friendly to her, that's when her guard goes down and something happens, right? Where it's like, oh shit, the door's open at night, what the fuck? There's something lurking around, but it's not him, right? But she still suspects that it's him. And so I thought that was part of the movie was well done, because you get to see through the eyes of the character and realize, can you really trust this person? And if I can trust this person, is that kind of their intention? And you come to realize that Bill Skarsgård is completely innocent, right? And it's like, damn, you feel bad because he dies at the ending of the first act. I was tricked, and it's done well enough. No, it feels a little bit fresh, especially the stunt casting, where it's like Bill Skarsgård is obviously Pennywise, and you're thinking, well, if he's in a horror movie, then it's probably means that he's the killer or something, and it's obviously playing on tropes and stuff that we all know. So I think it was well done in that regard. But at the same time, my biggest problem with the first act is that the main character, and this happens in all the other acts, the main character is kind of forced into driving the plot, right? Even though she's not comfortable going down into the basement and seeing, oh shit, there's a snuff dungeon down here, what the hell, right? She just continues to go along with it, even though she suspects Bill Skarsgård of being this, crazy weird guy, right? Like she even goes to a job interview, comes back, goes down in the basement, gets locked in the basement, and then repeats the process once she's broken out of the basement by Bill Skarsgård. It just seems weird, where it's just like, well, you didn't need to stay at the Airbnb anymore. You could have easily gone to another hotel. And that's where I feel like the script needed a little bit more boost. There needed to be a little bit more explanations of why she can't leave the house, right? Like you create these sort of roadblocks where you're like, god damn, like you're stuck in a scenario, right? And then it feels like the suspense is a little bit better, right? The second act is really dramatically different, where it ends off with Bill Skarsgård getting killed by this naked woman monster, and then it cuts to Justin Long, who's being Me Too'd, and his whole arc, I wouldn't even say he has an arc. It's sort of like you get to see who he is as the movie progresses, right? Where you're like, oh, he's being Me Too'd, but like, he's like, oh, I didn't mean to do it, and he's even like drunk and like calling up the woman that is being, accusing him of SA, right? He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this, I thought we consented and blah blah blah. So the movie kind of like portrays him in a way where you don't really know if he actually did the thing that he's, the press is saying that he did, right? It's sort of like how I guess we would see a lot of other people now in our post-Me Too era. I don't know if you want to say post, but you get my point, right? Where it's like, yeah, there are some people who were maybe not guilty of what the accusers claim, but it's still serious nonetheless, right? And we get to see that he is struggling, and he has to obviously pay off some bills because his career is over. And so he goes to the Detroit home that he owns, and this is where he gets involved with the main character, because it's actually his house that was being rented mysteriously, and now he has to kind of figure it out. And obviously he gets wrapped up with this naked woman in the basement. His character, while he doesn't have much to do until the ending, it's just, again, the second act is really there to just kind of play around with what's in the basement and realize, oh, there's this naked woman thing that's been down here for probably 4 years doing God knows what. And this is where the movie starts to become a little bit more campy and weird, instead of the beginning, which was a lot more of a thriller. The last act, it sort of revealed a little bit more information. We're introduced to a new character again, which is this, I don't even know how to call him, he's sort of a Golden State Killer type of character, right? Where he's going around abducting women, keeping them in their basement. In his basement, again, it starts off where it's like, hey, we don't really, we think that this is like some good guy, right? He's about to be a father, and then it turns out, nope, this guy's a sick motherfucker. Anyway, the point is, he is a, Golden State Killer type, and he's been living in this house for years, even though it was probably, sold off, or the bank probably took it over at some point, and so he's still down there. It's obviously revealed that this naked woman thing is actually his child. It's like this inbred thing that's been kept down there for 4 decades, and it's just a product of him molesting his victims. It's very nasty and sick, really fucking sick. And we get to see his interaction with Justin Long, and I'm guessing this is where the movie is trying to make parallels of, well, what degree of SA and these type of people who are accused, right, are they like this Golden State guy, where they're just sick in the head and want to just molest all these women and just hold them captive, or is it kind of genuinely a mistake? And I think the movie does, toward the ending, kind of give you an answer, which is, well, they're not the same, and they shouldn't be ever compared to being the same. Justin Long is still a douchebag, and he's still not a good person. This is someone who is willing to throw women under the bus to protect himself, right? And who really knows, maybe he probably didn't do it, but at the same time, he did, because he was willing to probably do things that he himself wouldn't admit to, but realized that, hey, it was the moment, and I had to survive, and I had to look out for myself, and blah, 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 which is basically what happens in the ending, where both him and the main character are trying to escape, and from, obviously, the naked woman, they get to the point where they're there's nowhere to go, and so he decides to throw her off this building in order to kind of get this monster off of his back, and so he can survive. And obviously, the main character is like, what the hell, right? We're all like, wow, this is crazy that he would actually do this. And as a result, he ends up getting his just desserts, and he dies, and the naked woman actually saves the main character. So it's kind of weird in that regard. And I guess this whole movie, like I said, is about gender parallels and stuff. So, I think it was structured pretty decently, but then toward the ending, it started to fall apart, where it was like, there's so much setup and there's so much stuff that needs to be explained to the audience in order to get the social commentary, where there's not enough time to do all of this. I feel like it needed a little bit more time to really flesh out things and actually have a little bit more horror, because again, toward the ending, it started to get less campy horror and more just outright comedy, especially when the main character's thrown off the building and the naked woman lady jumps, and it's in slow motion in front of the camera, and it just looks really goofy. It really is. I don't know what else to say. But now on to the analysis. I don't want to do anything complex. This is why I'm just shooting a running gun. I don't care. We'll see how this goes. There was one thing about this movie that filmmaking wise I'll give credit, which is the lighting. A lot of horror movies obviously rely on darkness, and sometimes the darkness I feel like is just sort of there to create atmosphere and not really say anything. Well, here I think it was done one effectively, because a lot of the times you would have a shot, right, especially like the naked woman, where she would kind of be in the darkness and you would see her, but you can't really see her. And I never really noticed that in other horror movies. It's usually like you could still see the person and they have maybe like a slight catch light on their like face or their body, so you can kind of see what's going on. But there it's like you see that there's a person in the shadow, but you still can't visibly see them, right? It's sort of like how we would normally see a shadow or something in a shadow, right? And it's even right in the beginning of the movie where the main character obviously pulls up to the house and it's the only house on with light, so you get to see all the other houses just shrouded with darkness on the back sort of night sky, right? And you know, later in the day we see that those houses were all abandoned and demolished and destroyed and full of graffiti, but yet in the beginning you would have never realized. And I think that also kind of plays with the theme of the movie, where it's like things aren't what they exactly appear to be, but they also are, right? Where it's like she knew that this neighborhood was obviously shady and weird, right? But she didn't know to the extent of how bad it actually was until it was daytime and it was revealed to her. And I feel like that plays with obviously Justin Long's character and obviously the Golden State type killer, right? The guy who's living in the basement, where it's like these people obviously sort of, they are who they are, but they also aren't. And you can't really tell until you sort of dive and understand it more. You get to see how it actually plays out, right? Where it's like Justin Long, you don't really know if he's actually this supposed Harvey Weinstein type person until you start to realize, oh shit, he's willing to throw this woman off a building just to save himself, right? So it's like, well, now you're kind of put things into question and be like, well, maybe he did do something to the girl. Maybe it's not the extent of you know, this crazy serial Golden State guy, but it still might be a little bit suspect, and I think people should still call it out. So I think in that regard the social commentary is interesting, and I can see why people are praising it, or at least critics are praising it for that regard. Now I want to talk about kind of the flaws of the movie, because there are a lot of flaws. I know a lot of people say that this is a masterpiece and yada yada. I don't really believe that, and I'll get into why. First off, one of my biggest problems is the main character. The main character establishes herself as someone who's always on edge, someone who isn't willing to trust the people around her, because it seems like she already had probably a bad relationship. We see that in the beginning of the movie where this boyfriend or somebody is calling her constantly and she's just ignoring it. And so as a result, she is very skeptical of other people, specifically men, and you would think that would translate to her choices, right? She locks the door. We get to see that in the beginning, but then it starts to turn into a decision where it's like, why are you going in this basement knowing that there is something that you shouldn't be looking into, right? Whatever this room is with the bucket and the camera and the bloody handprint, why go there? You don't need to go. Even when Bill Skarsgård is down in the basement screaming, again, it's like, why go there? You are already skeptical of this person. Why save yourself for him, right? And obviously they kind of explain it because, oh, she's kind of falling in love with him. She has kind of a crush on him, but it still doesn't make sense. It still doesn't, I don't entirely buy it. And then the character again does it in the second act or I should say that in the third, I guess it's like the second and third act, where she kind of escapes and there's this homeless character that was chasing her. Instead of just getting in her car or just running away, she kind of just goes back to the house or like tries to kill the monster. So you got the homeless guy and then you got the monster. And instead of just speeding off, she just goes, I'm gonna go and kill this monster. It's like, why? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. It's like you have the opportunity to escape. You don't care about the Justin Long guy because you just met this guy in the basement and who knows who he is. Just leave. So it's like, it's very hard to believe the character's making these decisions when she can easily get out of them. And another case is when the cops show up and she's sort of explaining what's going on, right? This is kind of her, like, I guess this was like her second escape, because she kind of escapes like 3 times throughout the movie. And so she's all dirtied up and she kind of, I guess she would look like some bum who's just like walking around, and she's like, hey, I need help. And the cops are like, yeah, we don't care, right? And which I'm not doubting that police wouldn't do this, right? I think we all interacted with cops and sometimes they just hand wave us away, especially if you you were looking like she was in the movie. So it kind of makes sense, but then you start to go, wait a minute, her car is right in front of her. Why doesn't she just say, look up my license plate and you'll see my ID and who I am, because I am the owner of this vehicle? It just doesn't really make any sense, where you're like, hey, you could have used that, right? It's like, oh, I don't have ID, I don't have a phone, but I have my car who is standing out here with identification. Why not use it? And I guess the writers didn't think of that. Maybe it was just sort of like, well, we're shooting and the car's right in front of her and no one realized. It just doesn't really make much sense. And I feel like if you're going to do something like this, where the character is put in the situation and it obviously has to go through the horror parts of the movie so it can be a movie, you kind of have to set up these roadblocks where it's like the character is only forced to go forward because there's no other choice. Like the license plate example, maybe Justin Long got when he came in and he saw the strange car, he was like, oh, fuck this car, what is it doing in front of my house? I'm gonna get it towed. And so he gets it towed, and then bang, she doesn't have the car. So then she's freaking out, and now she has to figure out, well, how am I supposed to identify myself, right? Like there needed to be a little bit more of a reason for her to do the things she was doing, and not so much, hey, we have to make her push forward because this is the point of the movie, right? The movie wouldn't exist if we don't push her forward. My other complaint about the movie is, well, I mentioned the tone, so I won't get into that really. There is one thing that drives me nuts about this movie, and the reason why I actually wanted to make this video and just talk about it is this whole movie is about two main characters getting put in the scenario where it's sort of a coincidence, right? How did someone set up two Airbnbs and on the same night for two different people and not realize, right? And the movie never explains this. I mean, never explain this. Seriously. There's an explanation of, okay, well, we know the property managers were probably making the Airbnb, but why did they make two of them for the same night? And it's never explained, right? It can't be Justin Long, because again, Justin Long was not involved with the property until the events of the movie. And then, like I said, the property manager did say that they were renting out before, but they said no one was renting it for that day, right? No one has rented it in months. That was like the quote, right? So what the heck, right? So then you're kind of believe, well, maybe it's the serial killer guy, or not serial killer, but serial Golden State type guy. I'm trying to avoid that particular word, the grape word. But he is, again, in the basement, and he doesn't really have the technology to do that, right? He doesn't have a smartphone, he doesn't have a computer. He's been there for 40 years, and it seems like he's never came out. So it's just weird, where you're like, who did this, right? This is totally intentional, right? It's definitely not the monster, because the monster doesn't seem to be that well equipped, and it'd be kind of ridiculous if it was. And I was sort of talking about this on Reddit, because I was like, well, who did set this up, right? And it seems like maybe potentially it was just a mistake. That's the only theory that people have like sort of cobbled together, and from my understanding, it makes the most sense, is that property managers didn't realize that they had Airbnb booked for that night and didn't tell Justin Long. But why not show that in the movie? I don't know. It just, to me, it's like, this was the part of the mystery, right? This is how the movie begins, how it's set up, and it's never explained. And I just hate it when movies do that. It's like, this is the premise of the movie, and this is a core feature or the beginning of a mystery. You should at least explain it, right? There needs to be some sort of conclusion, and unfortunately there wasn't. Now this video has gone on way too long. It's off the cuff, so I'm gonna try to edit it as best as I can. Apologies if there's any weird things that I've said, or like maybe I mispronounced someone's name or something, I don't know. But hopefully this is just like a quick video. Hopefully you stayed toward the ending and listened to my rambling. That was somewhat, it was rambling. Let's keep it real. But hopefully I make more of these types of videos where I just shoot out some ideas, talk about some, analysis or reviews. Nothing too in-depth, just because it takes so much time. But thanks for watching, and cheers.